any of those more nuanced questions that you have. And we'll make sure also that you get directly connected with Princeton in Africa as an organization, if that's something you're interested in pursuing. So without further ado, I'll dive right in and tell you more about myself to get started. So I am not much older than you in that I graduated from undergrad in 2017 from Northwestern University, just north of Chicago, actually very close to Kenosha, where a lot of things are happening. As you know, media attention is over there right now, but I studied education and social policy while I was there. And that's definitely contributed to my long-term career interests, which is really at the intersection of higher education and talent development. So how to make sure that young people like you are finding meaningful career pathways, and also in the long term contributing to building up the economy, and kind of filling in those talent gaps is really where my education interest lies. That's unique, or that challenge is unique in the African context right now. So my career has also kind of pointed me to look at those problems in the African context. And that's partially because of my background. I'm Ghanaian American, so I was raised in the States. My parents are from Ghana. And then also through the opportunities that I've had, like Princeton in Africa, to kind of further unpack how to address these societal challenges in a totally different context. Africa's population, this is just a fun fact and aside, is expected to double by 2050. So every year, the population is growing at a really accelerated rate. And so that means there's a lot of young people that are prepared and eager to join the workforce, but there's a lack of opportunity and places to plug them in and to make sure that they're growing and contributing once again to African economies developing. So that's the mismatch in like supply and demand that I'm trying to think about through my career choices. And so just starting this coming up fall, actually next month, I'm going to do my master's in higher education to look a little bit further at how we can address some of these things in Africa. So that's about me. And now we'll talk.
Would you please share with them where you're going to go do your master's degree? I think that would be something that they would enjoy hearing.
Yeah, so I'm off to London. I'm packing my bags as we speak. I'm going to Oxford University to do this work. And that's where some of the scholars who are looking at career development in Africa are based. So that's the plan.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It will be a time, that's for sure. So what is Princeton in Africa? And what are the components that make up the fellowship program? Princeton in Africa aims to help future leaders develop lifelong connections to the people and the nations of Africa. And you should know that it is affiliated with Princeton University, the fellowship program. Their offices are based on campus, and they use campus resources in terms of facilities, but it is an independent 501c3. They don't receive funding from the university. So there is a connection, but it's not maybe as strong as you might imagine by hearing the name Princeton in Africa. And they accept students or future fellows from campuses across the country, not exclusively Princeton. So just keep that in mind, which is why I'm here chatting with you. The program itself is 12 months long, and it is a firm commitment. So when you are accepted as a fellow, you're committing to that full year's experience. They're very adamant that you don't truncate that. There are people who might extend their fellowship program beyond 12 months if the work with their host organization is going well, but the minimum commitment through the fellowship program is 12 months. And when you're committing, who are you committing to? You're committing to the host organization. And what that means is Princeton Africa kind of acts as your talent agent or like employment liaison. So you apply to this program through Princeton in Africa, and if you're accepted, they are the ones who will match you with a host organization in somewhere in Africa. And they match you with that organization based on your skill set and your interest, not necessarily based on like country that you want to live in or city that you think is really amazing. That comes into consideration, but it's more so, what can you offer and what are these organizations that they've partnered with looking for? And that's how they make that match. So you are committing to the host organization that Princeton in Africa sets you up with when you commit to this fellowship program. On top of that, you're committing to the host community where this organization is based. So for me, that was the capital city of Zambia, Lusaka. And so I wasn't just signing up to work for KF, which is the organization I'll tell you about a little bit later that I was matched with, but I'm committing to the Lusaka lifestyle, to meeting people there, to living my life in the Lusaka flow and rhythm, if you will, for a full 12 months. And then lastly, you're committing to the fellowship community. So Princeton in Africa has been running for just over 20 years. And so there are a lot of alumni. There's a huge alumni network of people who have completed their 12-month fellowship programs. And when you're committing to the fellowship, you're committing to kind of staying in network and contributing to that alumni community when you're done. And you're also committing to the other fellows. So there are about 50 fellows that are accepted year over year. That's slightly different this year because the programs are taking place virtually in light of COVID, but in a standard year, there's about 50. There were 54 in my cohort, and you're committing to that entire group. So there's all of us. This was just this past March. We were in Moshi, Tanzania, which is just outside of Mount Kilimanjaro. So halfway through your fellowship program, all the fellows come together to do kind of a reflection and processing, unpacking, do a lot of activity around those processes to make sure that our heads are clear and that we've processed how our program has gone thus far and what our goals are for making it the best experience possible moving forward. And so you're committing to supporting each other as you all navigate your really diverse fellowship experiences. You're coming from different countries, different contexts, and you're all living and working in really different settings. But it's a really great support network, and just as much as you're gaining support from them, you're kind of expected to help support the others that are a part of this community. Some of my closest friends from my entire year, less than a year in Zambia, came from this fellowship cohort. And then a little bit more about the host organizations that we are all matched with. They're unique. A lot of them are niche organizations solving problems in their own, unique communities. And there is no one industry or sector that takes precedence when Princeton in Africa is vetting these host organizations. It's they'll have a pool of organizations that they do work with. Princeton Africa will work with year over year, and they have been consistent in their hosting of fellows, and fellows have reported really positive experiences. But on top of that, Princeton Africa is also constantly analyzing feedback from the fellows after each fellowship has completed to make sure that should this organization stay on, or should we let them go for the upcoming year and try to find a new organization to fill that spot? Princeton Africa also pays attention to what industry demands are. So several years in a row, there are more and more applicants coming through with interest in working in communications, for example, and there haven't been a ton of host organizations who have had roles in communications. Princeton Africa will then shift their attention to recruiting and vetting organizations that do have opportunities in that area. So that the list of organizations is always changing, but there are some consistent partners. And you'll see, I'll show you here just a few examples of placements that fellows actually had this past year in my fellowship cohort in particular. You'll see how diverse the placements are. You'll see diverse in terms of location and in terms of the types of work that the individuals themselves were doing. I had friends doing social enterprise investment in Kenya's capital city. I know somebody mentioned they wanted to be in Kenya. We actually do. Princeton Africa has quite a few placements in Nairobi. And that's a very urban, kind of fast-moving setting, as you can imagine. And then you had people, if you look the fourth one down, people doing education research at a wildlife center in remote Kenya. And so same country, totally different types of work, and totally different, as you can imagine, day-to-day rhythms. And so it is really important to think about, well, what is it that I need to feel like I can be fully functional as a person, as a human being for a 12-month period? Is it going to be impossible for me to survive in a really, really remote location? Is a really intense urban environment going to be too overwhelming for me? And so Princeton Africa is interested in hearing kind of what your preferences are in terms of living situation or environmental context. But the priority when it comes to making matches and placements is really about the skill set that you're able to offer these organizations and the sector industry that you're most interested in contributing to. Is that clear so far? Any questions at this point? I'll just pause for a moment.
I came in late, but I might need to see. I don't know if you said anything before all this, that 10 minutes. I had class, so.
No problem. Thanks for joining us. We didn't do an intro or conversation amongst all of us yet, but we'll leave time for that at the end. So I'm going to dive in a little bit deeper to talk about what it is that I did during my fellowship experience. I was working for an organization called Kushe Tekela Foundation. Kushe Tekela means to give hope in Bemba, which is one of the languages spoken in Zambia. It was actually the organization was founded by a Princeton Africa alum who was doing work in Zambia for his fellowship program, and he realized there was a need in the education space that he didn't see being filled. And so he pioneered Kushe Tekela Foundation to sponsor students who wouldn't have been able to go to high school otherwise. The Zambian education system offers free education up till grade 7. Once you get to grade 8, the costs go up a little bit in terms of tuition, like school fees, as well as uniforms and books. And so for a lot of families who are low income, that's the point when there's young people will stop attending school is grade 7 because the costs become too exorbitant. So KIF gets money primarily from United States-based donors to get these young people who are high performers all throughout elementary school and pushes them through the secondary school system, actually in a private school setting, to make sure that they're getting top tier education. And KF also comes alongside the students to do mentorship and kind of extracurricular leadership development outside of what they're getting in the classroom environment. And so often our students will go on summer programs over here in the States, actually, through programs like Yale Young Global Scholars and Stanford Pre-Collegiate Summer Institute. Our students also are assigned mentors, local Lusaka-based mentors, and so they have kind of their network expanded over the course of the 5 years that they're under the scholarship program. They're doing mini internships throughout their 5 years, so by the time they come out of grade 12, they're really holistically developed and well-networked young people who are much more prepared to kind of contribute back to, go on to tertiary education, but contribute back to their families than they would have been without the support of the program. So it was a small organization, staff of 3, and so I was doing pretty much anything you can imagine relating to the programs that I just mentioned. A lot of tertiary guidance, so university application guidance work, a lot of kind of mentorship matching for my students, and a lot of internship placements for them. So connecting with employers in Zambia to make sure our students had those opportunities. Highlights for me, I mentioned when I first started that working in education, specifically in the African context, is something that I'm long-term committed to. And this was the first time that I was on the continent actually doing that type of work. And so just to have a level of confirmation that this is indeed a field I'm going to continue to pursue, and that the challenges that the state of education in Africa presents right now are indeed pressing, and it's important to commit to that work, is something that became clearer over the course of my year. And so that was definitely one of my major takeaways. But on top of that, the network that I developed was super important for me. Not only the network that I've developed through Princeton in Africa, which is really, really good about making sure that they're providing career opportunities and sharing opportunities for additional fellowships with us once we become alumni. The network that I made even by living in Lusaka, connecting to other young professionals who are interested in similar work to myself, has really paid dividends. And I just finished my fellowship a month ago. There was an organization that I followed for a really long time, actually reached out to me to set up an interview for a role that hadn't even been posted with their organization, because of somebody that I knew in Lusaka sharing with them about the work that I was doing with KF. And so it's really in the particular industry or sector that you occupy, it's really easy to kind of have word go around about the work that different types of people are doing on the continent, especially as expats. So I think it's been important. The fellowship has been important for me in that way. And then lastly, as a Ghanaian American, I was really only connected to West Africa on a personal level. And so getting to experience the diversity of the continent by living in Southern Africa and feeling like I understand even the social, political, and historical dynamics of a different region of the continent was another huge takeaway for me. I could list many, many, many more, but those are some of the ones I wanted to share. Challenges. Of course, there are also many, many, many more than were listed here, but some of the most important ones I think that you might want to be aware of as you're thinking about what the realities of a fellowship like this could be are workplace dynamics. So really small organization, staff of 3. And so and this could be true at any organization that you're working for anywhere in the world, but any sort of emotion that was expressed amongst us as colleagues, you feel really intensely because there's just 3 of you. There's nowhere else for the emotions to diffuse, for example. But on top of that, it's a totally different cultural context. And so sometimes even the way the emotions were expressed or the way that we would choose to solve a problem was confusing to me as an American. And so I was doing kind of 2 layers of processing at any given moment. What does it mean to be working in a Zambian workplace? But on top of that, what does it mean to be in this particular kind of small organizational, or working on a small team, I should say. So those are things that I thought about daily. Integration. So I had a really large workload because the staff was small. We all had a lot of work to do and we're very busy. And so it was very easy for me to become all consumed with work and spend less time really getting to know the Lusaka community outside of my students and colleagues. And so, but that's a priority. As I mentioned, it's important to commit to the host organization when you're signing up for a program like this. And so figuring out how to prioritize meeting people outside of work was something that was a challenge. And was able to kind of start to get into that rhythm a bit more right before COVID hit and my program was suspended. So something to do a little bit of thinking on even ahead of time before you get in country. What am I going to involve myself in? What kind of activities am I going to pursue to make sure that I'm meeting people outside of the professional environment? And finally, logistics and compensation can present a challenge for Princeton and Africa fellows. Every fellow is given a stipend, a living stipend for the course of their 12 months, either funded by Princeton and Africa or by the host organization itself. But it's just enough compensation to cover your daily living. There's not much wiggle room there. So it'll cover the cost of your housing, food, and transportation, essentially. So if you're someone who's just completed undergrad, for example, and hasn't had much work experience yet or hasn't had an opportunity to really save, you have to do a lot of calculation in terms of, is this going to be feasible for me? Am I going to be comfortable knowing that maybe I'm not going to be able to travel as much as some other fellows might because I don't have that flexibility in my budget? Or is it better for me to work for a year to have a little bit of savings before considering a program like this? Princeton Africa is not responsible for your airfare, so that's something that you end up covering on your own. There's also a mandatory orientation that all accepted fellows attend in June, and the airfare or whatever transportation that you take to and from where you're living to Princeton University for orientation is on your own. That's an expense that you carry. And so it's certainly feasible. Many of the fellows just completed undergrad before taking on their fellowship. But I think it's important to know off the bat that it's not comprehensive in terms of the compensation that's required or that's given to fellows. It is in terms of your living expenses while in country, but not in terms of those extra expenses that might come up along the way. Things like visa and passport, for example. All right, so what does it take to be a strong applicant for a program like Princeton in Africa? What sort of skill set do you want to bring to the table? What level of commitment is Princeton in Africa looking for from applicants? I think that you can start to address some of those questions by thinking to yourself, doing a lot of reflection on these 2 questions to the right. Why Africa? And then 2, what are your professional goals? Why Africa is really important because Princeton in Africa is specifically looking for applicants who have a long-term interest in engaging the African continent. They are not looking for individuals who are looking for a 1-year vacation or a 1-year opportunity that's not going to transpire into anything more significant that the student or the individual is trying to build upon in the years to come. They're trying to establish a real network and long-term engagement between Princeton and Africa alumni and even the organizations or communities that we are placed in. So asking yourself, okay, even if I don't have prior experience on the continent, what is it about working in Africa for a year that really intrigues me? What dynamics about Africa have I explored before and I want to explore further? Or maybe I haven't had a chance to explore, but these are the particular reasons why they intrigue me. I think if you can articulate those things through your application, Princeton Africa is going to be intrigued by you as an applicant. But to not address, especially if you don't have prior experience on the continent, not to address where your interest comes from in a full and comprehensive way could be a miss in terms of making sure that your application stands out. So in summary, your prior experience is not, you don't need prior experience to be a successful applicant, but to show that you've thought critically and carefully about why this opportunity matters to you and what the long-term vision is going to be super important. Also considering that there's a real history of Western-based organizations doing work in Africa that is full of really complicated power dynamics and saviorism complexes. And I think in order to even feel comfortable as an individual with why you're going on to do work like this and in a community that's probably less developed than the one that you come from or at least are in right now as a university student, is going to be really important. Even on a personal level, I would encourage you to do some of that thinking. And on that note, if you are interested in more resources on what it can be like to talk about race or Blackness in the African context and international race in the international development context, I do have some resources that I'm happy to share. So my contact is going to be at the end of the presentation, but I can always send those your way if you're kind of looking for ways to think about what some of this might mean for you. Secondly, what are your professional goals? What is it that you're hoping to learn skill set wise from your fellowship experience? Where do you want to be by the time the 12 months is over in terms of professional skills? On top of that, what are the skills that you already bring to the table? What work experience do you have, and how can you market that as a value add to Princeton in Africa, which of course then will be a value add to your host organization. Many of you may not have had full-time work experiences yet, but that's okay. There are many ways to kind of filter through the internship experiences or even campus projects that you've done to talk about what transferable skills you're going to be able to bring into this experience. And in this particular dynamic of working on a cross-cultural team, those soft skills, the transferable skills that are maybe less tangible, are actually going to be a huge asset. Your problem-solving skills, your time management skills, your ability to communicate through conflict are going to be probably of increasing importance when you're working with people that are from a totally different background than you. So marketing that part of yourself is also going to set you apart as a strong applicant for a program like this. Princeton in Africa is trying to understand which types of individuals or applicants are going to be able to hold their own in what can be really kind of complicated work situations that come up inevitably when you have an American young person working with a group of African colleagues. So, I'm going to go back because I didn't get to point out my lovely students. This is a group of 10, 11th, and 12th graders at one of the schools that I was working with when I was in Lusaka. And I tried to sprinkle pictures of them throughout the presentation, so I want to make sure I point them out. So what does it mean now to start the application process? Applications are open as of this week, and they will be open until the end of October. So you have several weeks to get the application together if applying now is something that's interesting to you. How do you apply? It's all online. PrincetonAfrica.org is where you can find all of this information, but the components of the application will be 6 short essays. The number, at least that was the number when I sent in my application a couple of years ago. But the short essay format definitely still applies. I'm just not exactly sure how many of them you'll have to write. And then you'll submit kind of standard documentation, resume, transcripts. You will need a letter of recommendation from a former supervisor or a faculty member, and there's an application fee as well. Princeton in Africa would love to get you personally on their mailing list. And so as much as we will send all of your contact information to Princeton in Africa themselves, you can also reach out to this email address, Princetonapp@princetonandafrica.org, to make sure that you are requesting to be on their mailing list as well. And so for them to hear from you individually is always a good thing. They'll be hosting a webinar information session mid-October that will give a little bit more detail on what happens after the application has been submitted and what the interview, vetting, placement process is like. So, okay, these are my lovely students once again, the larger picture in the middle there, writing their SATs last October. What should you think about as you prepare your essays, which are probably the bulk of you'll probably spend a bulk of your time and attention during the application process on the essays themselves. I think it's important to prioritize showing multiple dimensions of yourself through the application process. So each of you are multifaceted individuals with unique interests and past experiences and motivations for pursuing a program like this. So you're going to want to present as many aspects of yourself as you can in the application to show your multidimensionality. You want to talk about, for example, your background. What sort of past experiences have you had that has brought you to this point today? You'll want to talk about your future goals and vision and ambition. You'll also want to sprinkle in areas of your undergraduate experience that have been particularly meaningful to you. So don't necessarily feel like there's only, because this is a program-based or a program that is looking for students who have long-term interest in Africa, don't necessarily feel like that's the only part of yourself that you should or could talk about as you put this application together. Instead, think about it more as, how do all of my life experiences come together to point to the fact that this is the right program for me at this particular time in my life? And so you want to weave a narrative that brings together multiple dimensions of who you are to show that this is the next thing for me to further explore my identity or my goals. One of my favorite tips for storytelling when it comes to applications like this is to start your essays with a particular moment in time. Use sensory details and imagery to draw us into a moment, and then zoom out a little bit further from there and explain how that moment contributes to the larger point that you're trying to make in the essay. And so it's kind of a zoom in and then zoom out model. And I say this because it becomes really easy for the reader to then be really captivated by whatever it is that you're saying if you start with those sensory details. And that's kind of a tried, tested, and true, at least one approach to making sure that your essays are engaging for the reader. And on top of that, my largest piece of feedback, even for the students that I was working with in Zambia, is not to skip the planning process when it comes to your writing. It is so essential that you have a really robust outline before you start writing. If you're anything like me, when I was an undergrad, people told me all the time to plan, but I just wanted to get to it. I had my ideas, I wanted to flow. But you'll find that especially if you're working with somebody else, like the Opposite International programs, who will help you through this application process, or a friend who's kind of serving as your editor, or someone who's giving you feedback, if you show them first the outline that you have for what you intend to write, they're able to say right then and there, okay, these ideas flow. I can see where you're going and I can see the point that you're trying to make. However, maybe if you move point number 3 to point number 1, everything's going to come out a little bit clearer. This also helps you to make sure that you know where you're going and that your ideas are very clear and that there's no confusion in the point that you're actually trying to make. And so you'll find that the planning process is probably, if you're doing it fully, maybe even more challenging than the writing process, because it forces you to really filter through all of your ideas. But it's going to make it much easier on your people who are giving you feedback and on yourself if you can address any challenges or inconsistencies in your writing during the outlining process before you even get to drafting. And so if that's not a practice that you're in the habit of doing, why don't you try it with an application like this and see how it might enhance your writing process. It's been a challenge for me myself to get into the place where I'm actually I'm excited about doing an outline, but now that I am, I can say that it saves some headache and stress down the road. So this is a photo of me here on the right in front of my flat that I lived in Lusaka, just before I found out that I was going to be coming back home. So what does the application timeline look like? Applications are open now. End of October, they'll be due. By mid-December, you'll find out if your application has been successful and you're invited for an interview. This year, the interviews will be held virtually mid-January. The interview is really a chance for Princeton and Africa to understand what they're trying to make a good match. So they're trying to understand what are those other pieces of who you are that are going to contribute to your well-being or happiness or satisfaction during that year. So are you someone that really does want to live in that urban location, or do you think that you could do a little bit better in a slower pace environment? They're going to try to ask questions to really get at fit. What skill set, what exactly did you do on this project that you mentioned in this one essay or in this one line of your resume, to see if there's a real fit between the things that you're able to produce or contribute to and the needs that the employer partners might have voiced even in the more recent months. So the interview is really Princeton Africa looking to determine fit. If your interview is successful, there's an ongoing placement process that starts after your interview and lasts really to the end of May. So for that period in time, you'll find out if you've been invited into the candidate pool. If you've been invited into the candidate pool through Princeton in Africa, it doesn't mean that you've necessarily secured a placement yet. It means that your information, your resume, is now being put forward to organizations with whom Princeton in Africa thinks you could be a good match. And then this organization will interview 3 to 4 fellows for each position that they're looking to fill, and they'll choose one fellow. So being in the candidate pool is kind of like you're competing against the other applicants who have been successful up until that point, and you still have to secure one more layer of approval through the interview with the host organization. If you interview with the host organization and you don't get the position, you're still in the candidate pool. So Princeton in Africa might go back to the drawing board and put you forward to another organization with whom they also think you could be a good fit. However, it can be the case that you're in the candidate pool and it turns out that you didn't get a role with an organization through Princeton in Africa. So it is confusing, or a kind of a maybe more anxiety-inducing stage of the application process to know that you've been successful and vetted through Princeton in Africa up until that point, but there's still another layer of vetting that comes from the host organizations. So your fellowship isn't necessarily guaranteed just because Princeton in Africa has said yes. If you're successful with the host organization, then your fellowship is confirmed. You have 72 hours after that to accept the offer from the host organization. And that's when you'll get a little bit more of the details on compensation, for example. Because it's only a 3-day window at which you have to say yes or no. That's why I wanted to give you a little bit of that information on what logistics and compensation can feel like through Princeton in Africa, so that you're not having to think about those things for the first time after you get your offer. The reason the window is so tight is because if you say no, the Princeton Africa needs to be able to offer that role to the next applicant in line. So if all of that works in your favor, then the mandatory orientation for all fellows is held in June, where Princeton Africa will brief you on how to be successful during your fellowship placement. And then you'll start anywhere from June to August of that year, and you'll complete your 12-month fellowship from there. This information is all, even with more detail, on Princeton in Africa's website. I just wanted to make sure that I walked you through it so you can get a sense of kind of the rigor and the pace of the application process. Okay, and my thoughts as I start to wrap up is, these are more so pieces of encouragement. I think that this is a process that has the potential to be really life and career trajectory changing, to spend a significant amount of time in a community and country that's totally foreign, and where you're doing really meaningful and collaborative work. And so it's important to stop now in these early stages and really reflect on why this intrigues you, and what about something like this makes sense for someone like you in the stage that you're at. And I think if you have a really good grasp on what this could mean to you or why it matters to you, it's going to come out in your essays, it's going to come out in your interview, but it's not work that you should skimp on. I think doing the individual processing and understanding and interrogating of some of the questions that I mentioned earlier will really prove dividends when it comes down to making a strong application. I also think it's important to know that there were quite a few fellows in my cohort who had several years of work experience before they applied for a program like this. So you do not have to be a recent undergrad, and there's no technical cap on when it's too late to apply for a fellowship program like this. It's just knowing that these placements are generally entry to mid-level placements. And so after a certain point, someone is probably no longer going to be interested, but it's not a program that you need to rush into necessarily. And I found that having a couple years work experience added a lot of value to what I was able to do and talk about during my fellowship placement process. I emphasized this earlier, but it's really important to plan well when it comes to the writing. And that's what I call a healthy writing process, is to take things in stages and to get feedback at every point along the way. And so not skipping out on the outline is something I want you to take with you. Seeking support. I don't think that applying for any type of fellowship application or any type of fellowship, it should be an individual process. Although you're going to be the individual actor, perhaps, or the main actor, you want to have support of your university, the staff members, the lovely staff members who facilitated this call. Stephanie and Miss Myers, I know, are always going to be behind you and rooting for your success. And so speak with them early and often about these plans. And also make sure that you have people even outside of this community who are helping to serve as readers and give some external feedback to how your essays are coming together and how your application is fitting, what sort of feelings that they get when they read your application or looking through your essays. I think that seeking support from others is going to be really valuable in making sure that you're polishing your story in a way that is digestible. Fourth, cast a wide net. There are several programs that are comparable, if you will, to Princeton in Africa. Princeton in Africa is certainly unique in that it's really focused on, well, one, that it's diverse. The things that you can do under this fellowship program are quite limitless, but and it's focused on kind of professionalism, but there are many opportunities that can potentially accomplish similar goals for you if you're looking to kind of make your foray into working on the African continent. So yes, pursue Princeton in Africa if it makes sense for you, but also don't limit yourself. Cast a wide net. I know that you've probably heard of Fulbright at this point in time, and that's just one of the many programs that are similar that can help get your foot in the door to working in Africa. So do your research and make sure that you're pursuing every opportunity that's available so that if anything, you have options at the end. And finally, interrogate. This is around personal identity, social identity, what it means to be Black American. That comes with its own, weird to say, level of privilege when you're talking about working in Africa. And so starting to think early and often about what it will mean for you and all the identities that you carry to be on the African continent, even the hidden identities, the ones that maybe we're less inclined to talk about, but that we also know could pose challenges when living in a really conservative cultural community, for example. And so you can never be, I should say, fully aware of how those dynamics are going to present once you actually get the opportunity to travel. But it's important to start doing your reading and interrogating your own motivations and potential possibilities for what that experience could feel like as someone who carries the identities that you do when you're in Africa. So those are my notes that I'm leaving you with. And from there, would love to open it up for more discussion.
I was gonna ask, as far as the application, I know it's the you put in the application. How do you know, like, I guess, like, what's the starting application pool and how that decreases as you go to the interviews and so far?
Right. It's a great question. They don't publicize exact numbers. What I know is that last year, Princeton Africa received between 400 and 500 applications. And the candidate pool is probably somewhere in the range of 100. So probably like 2 fellows per every available spot when it comes to the candidate pool process where you've been accepted by Princeton in Africa and are now being put forth to different employers. That can change year over year, depending on number of host organizations, number of positions available, and how qualified are the applicants. Maybe they'll accept more in a given year because there are more people who could potentially be good fits. So it varies, but those are some general numbers.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know if you guys were talking about this before I came on, but what other, or can you like list some of the cities that Princeton Africa is in or has partners in?
Yeah, great question, Precious. It's all over. I will say, just off the top of my head, during my cohort, we had fellows in Accra, Ghana. We had fellows in Nairobi, Kenya, Johannesburg, South Africa, Lusaka, Zambia, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, Abidjan, Ivory Coast. We had fellows in Togo. We had fellows in Sierra Leone, Freetown, Sierra Leone. And the cities that I just listed were the urban centers. And there were several fellows who were in maybe peri-urban or more remote settings. And so, we were in probably 20 or 30 something different countries.
Okay.
The list of those particular locations is on the Princeton Africa website, so you can check it out in more detail.
Okay. Thank you.
My bad. But when you say remote, do you mean like the animals could get me?
There was one placement this past year that was on a wildlife conservation center, but those were fellows who were interested in doing that kind of work. All the living situations are safe. Well, in many cases, you'll find your apartment or place to live yourself. So you'll actually decide what you feel comfortable with. But the host organizations and Princeton Africa are going to make sure that your safety comes first. And there's lots of sessions on even how to find appropriate housing that suits your personal expectations. But in some locations like Nairobi, you're going to have lots of access to different kinds of accommodations. In the more remote locations, you can almost expect that the accommodations available are going to be of a certain nature, where you're using the bathroom into a hole in the floor, not into a porcelain bowl. And so there's some variance in terms of like what you can get at each location, but that variance is smaller in the more remote setting.
All right. Thank you.
I think earlier you said that y'all had like other things besides like the Princeton fellowship thing. So what would I do? Like what website if I didn't like get in for this? Like I don't know any other websites for like stuff like this to get into.
Yeah, I think that's a great conversation to have with Stephanie and Miss Myers, what the options are based on your goals and your career plans. Fulbright is one that I mentioned earlier, where you can do either research or teaching in another international location. And it requires kind of a similar proposal, application building, case making process to apply. Those are just off the top of my head. And there are some that are much more short term. For example, even through the university that I went to, Northwestern, they have a Global Engagement Summer Institute, they call it, which is just a 10-week program that you could do like right after graduating, for example, in the international development space. But there's a website called, I think it's Pro Fellows, if I'm not mistaken, that will actually, it has like a database where you can search different types of fellowship opportunities. Yeah, it's profellow.com. So that could be a good place to start, just to do some initial research.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Did anyone have any more questions? Thank you, Diane. Let's give Diane a huge round of applause for sharing her time in Zambia and also just giving more information about Princeton in Africa. Like Diane said, there's other opportunities as well. And you want to look at each opportunity and also see if they're a good fit for you, you know? And so every Friday up until end of September, early October, we will be hosting Fellowship Fridays to showcase and just talk about the different international fellowship opportunities. Diane, the one that you mentioned, Fulbright, ETA, so we're actually next week going to talk about the Fulbright English Teaching Award. So for those who are specifically interested in going abroad and teaching abroad for 9 to 12 months, this is a great opportunity for you. So you want to make sure that you learn about each fellowship and then it aligns with your goals and where you see yourself in the future. All right. Well,
I just want to say thank you to Diane, and we appreciate you taking your time. I know you're packing up, getting ready to go to Oxford, but that you took time to share with our Prairie View Panthers. We're very, very grateful to that. And thank you very much. You didn't have to do it, and we really appreciate you. And it's a wonderful presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Myers. It's been a pleasure to get to know all of you, even virtually, and spend a few moments together. And you can definitely, if you have more questions or wanted to talk individually, I'm more than happy. Stephanie has my contact information. And I mean it when I say don't hesitate to reach out. I'm happy to be part of that support network if you're putting together an application.
Thank you.
all right. Diane, do you mind staying a few minutes after I had a few questions for you about the fellowship? But everyone, thank you. Everyone have a good day and enjoy your weekend.
And be safe.
Thank you so much.
Mask up. Mask up.
You guys have a good one.
Okay, take care.
Bye,
Thank you, Diane.
everybody.